first, more than anything else. Their faith in him never wavers. Recently, the number of demon attacks has been on the increase. Many towns and villages have fallen. King Ezed received word of a small town in the northeast that has been overrun by demons. He orders his royal knights to assist the small town in hopes of quelling the raging demons that are causing havoc. Leading the royal knights is Daemon, the king's most trusted knight. He rose through the ranks fast with his superior swordsmanship, earning him the position of the royal knights' leader. He and his 21 men must suppress the demons and free the village. Upon arrival, the town lay in ruins. Buildings that once stood tall were no more than rubble. The town, once renowned for its beauty, now paled in comparison to its former glory. The townsmen's bodies filled the streets, while demons numbering in the 40s ran rampant. "Men, ready your weapons." Raising his blade above his head, Daemon shouted, signaling to charge forth. The knights cried out as they charged the horde of demons. One by one, they succumbed to their might. One of the knights landed a fatal blow to a demon. Its blood splattered over him. However, unknown to the knight, he collapsed to the floor. A demonic scream filled the air. He rose and cut down one of his fellow knights. Daemon quickly rushed over to the slain knight, realizing that the blood was a catalyst, turning all those who came into contact with it into lesser demons, human-sized, less powerful than a normal demon. They normally moved in numbers to compensate for their lack of power. Daemon looked around to see if he could find the demon that was controlling the lesser demons. He spotted a large demon covered in spikes from head to toe, with fists as big as boulders and skin as hard as rock. "Men, don't touch the blood. Strike swift, keep a distance from all fallen demons." Daemon cried out, informing his knights while trying to keep the largest demon at bay. The battle continued into the night. However, the demons seemed to be getting stronger, or perhaps the knights were simply growing weaker from what seemed to be an endless battle. The demons' numbers had only fallen by 10, while the knights were down to only 5 men. "Sir, we need to retreat. We can't keep this up," pleaded one of the knights. "No. If we fall back now, this town is done for. We need to keep fighting. If we retreat, then who will protect this town?" Daemon screamed. The battle grew even harder as more lesser demons rose, their numbers growing even more as the battle unfolded. Daemon told his men to regroup and stand firm. Gripping his sword's hilt tightly, placing his right hand over the blade, Daemon leaned forward, taking a stance. Lunging forward, he caught the large demon's leg. It let out a menacing groan. Looking at Daemon, with a sinister, crackling voice, the demon spoke. Human, who are you?" "In my life, not a single human has ever injured me, not one. But you managed to. Tell me your name, human." "Daemon." "I am the leader of the royal knights who serve King Ezed," Daemon said, introducing himself to the demon. "I will find much pleasure in making you one of my servants." "I will treat you well," the demon said, letting out a sinister laugh. The demon swiped his large, boulder-like hand. Daemon just barely dodged. With a loud thud, the demon's fist smacked into the ground, sending the rubble flying across the area and destroying the walls and windows of surrounding houses. A tall building, half the size it once was, sheltered 2 shadowy figures. "Is he the one?" One of the figures spoke. "Yes, he is. Tell our good friend we have found the counterpart. He will surely be glad," replied the second figure. The first figure vanished as if into thin air as the second figure continued to watch. Somewhere in the far east, the first shadowy figure knelt in front of a largely built man. "We have found the counterpart. What is your wish, my lord?" "Good. We start the next phase in our plans. Give this to him. He will know what to do with it. Ensure that he meets the counterpart. I will accept no failure." "Is that understood?" spoke the largely built man. "Yes, my lord." "As you desire it," replied the first shadowy figure. As the battle raged on, Daemon took his stance once again, shouting, "Demon, you will be slain here." The large demon laughed as it thrust its boulder-like fist again at Daemon. He stood there and, at the last minute, jumped on the arm of the large demon. The large demon pulled its body back in hopes that the knight would fall off. However, Daemon's sword skewered the cracks in the large demon's arm. He pulled his sword out and rushed towards the demon's head. Daemon was swung off its arm by the demon's other fist, landing on the ground with a loud groan. He stood, just barely clinging to his sword. It was clear to him that a few of his ribs had been broken. His right arm hung limp at his side. Staring directly into the large demon's eyes, his face covered in blood, Daemon lifted his left arm upward and flung the sword onto the ground. "Giving up already?" screamed the large demon. Daemon just stood there grinning. This infuriated the demon. It charged directly for Daemon. He stood there as a whistling sound could be heard resonating through the building. Cree! A giant bird-like creature flew down towards the large demon, its claws sharp enough to break through the toughest of metal, its beak long and jagged. The demon fell to one knee as the bird-like creature rammed its beak into the demon's eye and grasped the demon's arm with its razor-sharp claws. Daemon, unsure whether the bird-like creature was there to help or had just happened to see some prey, ordered his men to fall back and prepare themselves in case the bird-like creature was an enemy. The first shadowy figure reappeared. "Are you sure you should have interfered in the battle?" "Well, we don't want him to die. He is an important pawn, is he not?" replied the second figure. In the second shadowy figure's hand was a jet-black jewel. After the demon fell to the ground, no longer among the living, the second shadowy figure raised its hand towards the sky, grasping the jet-black jewel. "Return." The bird-like creature suddenly vanished. Daemon, not sure what to make of what had just happened, ordered his men to collect the belongings of their fallen knights. "Make haste, men. We do not know if it will return. Load all their belongings into the carriage. We are heading home." With his words, the 4 men left standing cheered, not because the battle was won, but because they were able to leave the hellhole, glad they were still alive and able to return home. "Daemon, I found a survivor," quickly shouted one of the knights. A young girl covered in cuts and bruises lay unconscious on the ground. The 4 knights gently lifted her into the carriage. One of his men placed a small blanket over the young girl to keep her warm during the ride back to Enzard. The royal knights made their journey back home, still recalling what they had seen, still fresh in their minds. They decided to make camp 4 kilometers from where the battle had taken place. 2 of his men made shelters for them, while the 2 other men set up the campfire. Daemon was tending to the young girl's injuries, washing her wounds and applying dressings to help the healing process. The next morning, just as the sun rose, Daemon and his men set off once again, hoping the young girl would regain consciousness soon. They took turns watching over her during the long journey back to Enzard. "Daemon, you rest. I will take over. We know you stayed up all night watching over her, so please try to get some sleep," one of the worried knights offered to take over. Daemon just nodded and dozed off to sleep. It had been days since Daemon had last slept, and he was still injured from the battle. His men were fully aware of the fact. The 2 knights who were driving the carriage started to have a little banter. "Hey, remember the battle 3 months ago?" asked one of the knights. "Yes, what about it?" replied the other knight. "Well, something about that fight doesn't make sense to me. We were surrounded by 91 men to our 13. Somehow, we managed to survive. We lost a lot of men that day too. It makes me wonder, are we alive because of the gods, or is it because Daemon has someone or something protecting him, and that is what causes us to survive? Questioned the knight. You have a good point. It does make you wonder. I think he may be favored by the gods. He is Daemon, after all, our best knight and our leader, the other knight replied with a large grin. Marcus, Quine, would you both keep it down? Daemon has finally fallen asleep. If you wake him, being cut off mid-sentence by the second-in-command of the Royal Knights, Elam. Yes, we know. We will keep it down, Marcus replied. The rest of the journey to Enzard was smooth sailing. By the 4th day of their journey, they had finally returned home. Men, I am headed to report to His Majesty. You should all head home to see your families. We don't know when we will next be sent on another task, so take your time and be with your families until then, Daemon said, knowing his men were still shaken by what had just occurred. On his way to meet the king, Daemon left the girl with his wife, Elaine, a member of the Royal Mages. Like the Royal Knights, their members were the best of the best. Only a select few could join their ranks. Elaine was well known for her remarkable healing magic. The citizens called her the Witch of Healing. Daemon, before you go, come here. Your men informed me of what happened. Let me see your arm and ribs. Elaine ordered Daemon to be treated on the spot. Daemon, knowing what would happen if he had refused, took his shirt off and showed Elaine his injuries. A bright yellow light could be seen coming from Elaine's hands as she invoked her healing magic. Thank you. I need to inform the king of what transpired at the small town and let him know we found a survivor, Daemon said, thanking Elaine as he made his way to the king's castle. Your Majesty, we have returned from the northeast, Daemon spoke while kneeling before the king. I am glad to see you have returned. What of the town? Any survivors? Questioned King Ezed. Daemon explained what had happened in the small town. The king's expression changed with each word that Daemon spoke. Your Majesty, I am sorry for the men we lost today. I will be going to each of the knights' homes personally to hand over their belongings to their families. If you will excuse me, Daemon said. Getting permission from the king to leave his presence, he headed to the homes of the fallen knights, speaking to each family one by one and handing them each the belongings. Somewhere in the Far East, the two shadowy figures appeared before the largely built man once again. The item has been handed to him as you requested. I had to interfere in the battle before the counterpart was killed. The second shadowy figure spoke while kneeling before the man. As long as he isn't dead, if he dies, everything will be for nothing. Understand? Has the mage returned yet? The largely built man asked the shadowy figure. He has been killed, my lord, the first shadowy figure responded. Leave me. I will summon you when your next mission is ready, shouted the largely built man, frustrated after hearing the mage could not finish the job he was hired to do. At Enzard Castle, the king had just finished welcoming an envoy from a neighboring domain. Elaine, who's next to be seen? That is all for today, Your Majesty. Tomorrow you have. Elaine started, flipping through the papers she had in her hands, about 3 envoys from Enag, Alade, and Barren Village. They are here about a conflict between the 3, something about Enag chief stealing the Alade chief's wife, and Barren chief was accused of instigating the whole incident. The king leaned back, placing both his index finger and thumb on the bridge of his nose, closing his eyes while sighing. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Your Majesty? Elaine looked worried as the king appeared exhausted. I'm okay. Their chiefs are brothers, always squabbling amongst themselves. Last year it was about Enag's farm should be bigger than both Alade's and Barren's farms combined. The king leaned forward to stand. Halfway through getting up off the throne, the king collapsed to the floor. Your Majesty. Elaine ran over to the king and started to use her healing magic. However, the spell did not seem to do anything. The king still lay there on the floor. Soldier, hurry. With that, the soldiers burst through the throne room doors to see Elaine kneeling over the king. Stand back. One of the soldiers pointed his pike towards Elaine. What happened? What did you do? Elaine stood back, lifting her hands in the air. I was trying to heal him, she replied in shock. You there, the soldier shouted to one of the other soldiers. Take her away. The other soldier looked at Elaine. Come with me. I am sorry, Elaine, to do this, but orders are orders. I'll inform Daemon of what is going on. He will sort this out. I know without a doubt you did nothing wrong. The first soldier wore a large grin on his face as Elaine was escorted to the dungeon cell. Elaine caught a glimpse of the grin on the soldier's face, whispering to the soldier who was taking Elaine to the cell, Kel, tell Daemon these exact words. He will understand. The soldier looked shocked but continued to escort Elaine as if nothing was said. Daemon. Daemon, I found you. It's Elaine. Come quickly. Kel shouted out to Daemon. Whispering the words Elaine spoke to him, Daemon's expression turned to that of anger. Take me to where Elaine is now. Daemon, knowing that there was not much time as Elaine was going to be pinned for the collapse of the king, hurried to Elaine. It's going to be okay. I will sort this out. Elaine just sat in the cell, not uttering a word. She knew she could put her trust in Daemon. Daemon made his way to the throne room. As he approached the doors, a soldier moved his spear diagonally in front of Daemon. You can't enter. Move, soldier. I am the king's royal knight. The soldier shook for a few seconds and slowly lowered the spear. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was you, Sir Knight. The soldier apologized as he let Daemon through. He noticed that something about the room did not look right. Has anyone been in the room since the king's collapse? Daemon asked the soldier. The soldier explained that the first two soldiers who heard the shout burst in, captured the perpetrator, and said for no one to enter the throne room. And where are they now? Questioned Daemon. The soldier, looking nervous, just said, I haven't seen them since. Daemon knew from what Elaine had whispered to Kel that they were not members of the soldiers tasked with protecting the throne room, thinking, how did no one realize? While the king was being taken to his chamber, the two soldiers sitting in a small, abandoned building spoke to one another. Oh man, that was easy. Did you see the look on that woman's face when I pointed my pike at her? I can't get enough. A man spoke to another man sitting next to him. I was worried when she tried to heal the king, thought it was over, spoke the other man. I was given this by our patron. The man held a dimly glowing purple stone in his hands. What is that? Questioned the other man. This little stone blocks all magic within a 5-foot radius. The man lifted the stone up and started staring at it. Meanwhile, the king was still unconscious. The mages had tried repeatedly to heal the king, but with no luck. Some of the mages seemed anxious due to Elaine's arrest. Daemon walked into the king's bedchambers. How is he? Daemon asked Elaine's apprentice, Azah. If only Elaine was here, she would have been able to do something, Azah responded while gripping a small circular necklace. It was something Elaine had given her when she first took her on as an apprentice. When a mage takes an apprentice, they hand them a necklace inscribed with the names of the master and the apprentice in ancient text that is believed to be the true language of the gods. Azah, concentrate. Elaine chose you. She turned down hundreds of people asking and pleading her to be their master. However, the moment she saw you, she knew that you were the one to be her apprentice. Is not now the time to show Elaine that she was right in choosing you? Remember, you are your master's apprentice. Remember everything Elaine has taught you. Daemon tried to encourage Azah, knowing full well that Elaine chose her because she could see just how powerful Azah could become. She had more potential than even Elaine did when she was that age. Azah took a deep breath. Clinging to the circular necklace, she placed one hand over the king's chest, closing her eyes. A faint yellow light could be seen emanating from Azah's hand. Azah thought of everything her master taught her and the time they had spent together, still not fully understanding what Elaine meant by, when invoking healing magic, the effects differ depending on your feelings. You have to find them yourself. I cannot explain them to you. It is something you have to realize and find on your own. This is your final task. Once complete, you will be a fully fledged mage. The dim yellow light slowly got brighter and brighter. The king's skin started to gain color again. One of the mages looked at the king and said, "He's not so pale looking." Azah, don't stop, keep going. Azah, finally understanding what her master meant, continued to perform her spell. With each passing second, the king's skin retained more color. Sir Knight, I finally understand what she meant. Daemon smiled. I knew you could do it. She told me that you had so much potential, more than she ever did, that one day you would be even better than her at healing magic. You just needed two things, confidence and understanding the true nature of healing magic. Azah started to blush as she continued to heal the king. Whatever this is that's ailing him is powerful. If we didn't treat the king, he would have died in less than 2 to 3 days. Sir Knight, please save my master. She didn't do it, I know she didn't. I will. You concentrate on doing your bit, and I will do mine. With that, Daemon left the king's bedchambers and headed to the local tavern. He knew that it was a popular hangout for those who worked behind the scenes. Once Daemon arrived at the tavern, he immediately sat down at the bar. What would you like, Sir Knight? The bartender asked. Placing 3 gold coins on the bar, any newcomers within the last few days? Daemon replied. Yes, indeed, we have 3 men at that table, the bartender said, pointing to the far corner and 2 men who were here yesterday dressed in peculiar outfits. Peculiar outfits? Daemon replied. Yes, indeed. They were newcomers, but wore the soldier's uniform. I know every knight, mage, and soldier here, but not them, the bartender whispered. Where are they now? Daemon asked, placing 3 more gold coins on the bar. Yes, indeed. They like to visit an abandoned building not far from here. The bartender grabbed a slip of paper and drew out the location. Slipping 2 more gold coins onto the bar, tell me if you see anyone else like that again, Daemon insisted. Yes, indeed. Understand, Sir Knight. Thanks for coming, have a wonderful day, the bartender replied. Daemon headed back to the king's chambers. Azah, Kel, let's go. I know where they are hiding out. Really? Thank the gods. Master, it will not be long now, Azah expressed her relief. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Elaine knelt praying for the safety of the king. She overheard the 2 guardsmen talking. They say the king died. Without him, we are nothing. I say we should kill her now. She killed the king, why not? Replied one of the guardsmen. Elaine sat there, tears in her eyes, remembering the first time she first met the king and Daemon 7 years ago. Your Majesty, I am glad to see you doing well. Elaine, come here and greet His Majesty. Esmond spoke to the king like an old friend. Esmond was a duke. He governed the far west quarter of Enzard, which the king gifted him after a large battle over the remaining gold just outside of Enzard's domain. Due to the gold mines running under Enzard, the king stated that it was part of his domain when other forces thought otherwise, and a 2-year war broke out with Enzard's king at the front lines commanding his troops. So this is your daughter. Hello, Elaine. It's nice to meet you. The king stood up and welcomed Elaine. Why, Your Majesty, Elaine said, lifting the pleats of her skirt as she introduced herself. Daemon, come here. King Ezid shouted. Yes, your mage. Daemon's eyes met Elaine's and he paused mid-sentence. Oh, what is this, Daemon? Breath taken away by her beauty? And there I thought you said, I am not interested in that courtship stuff, I am your knight. All I need is to follow my king, the king joked while a large, open grin appeared on his face. I am sorry. I am the king's royal knight, Daemon, he said, introducing himself to the duke and his daughter. Daemon here is like a son to me. I unfortunately was never blessed with children of my own, the king said, proudly showing Daemon off to the duke. So, this is the so-called best knight. Your Majesty, may I? Esmond asked the king. Of course. Daemon, face Esmond in a duel, the king demanded. 2 days' time, you will face off in an official duel. Understood, Your Majesty, Daemon replied. 2 days later, at the training grounds surrounded by thousands of citizens, Daemon and Esmond stood in the center facing each other. Daemon, want to make a wager? Esmond asked. Okay. What happens if I win? Daemon replied. You can have whatever you want, Esmond replied while looking in Elaine's direction, obvious of the fact she had fallen for Daemon. And if I win, I get whatever I want from you in return. Understood. Daemon got into his stance, lowering his left shoulder and moving his right hand over the blade of his sword. Esmond stood with his left hand in front of him and his right hand with his sword slightly behind him. Begin, the king announced. With that, Esmond rushed towards Daemon, swinging his arm that was behind his back towards Daemon. His arm stretched like a snake. Ah! I am called the Phantom Snake, and you will see why, Esmond pronounced with excitement. Daemon lunged forward, dodging Esmond's strike, just missing Esmond's right arm. The two continued to fight for what felt like several hours. Daemon stood still, raised his left arm into the sky, and flung his sword to the floor. The king sat forward, knowing what it meant when Daemon threw his sword to the floor. Daemon pulled a great sword from behind the backplate of his armor. The armorsmith who created Daemon's armor was well known for giving his creations unique gimmicks. Daemon's armor had a dimension pocket engraved into it, allowing Daemon to pull out his great sword from his backplate. The dimension pocket was connected to a separate dimension that allowed even a non-magic user to use the gimmick with ease. No magical input was needed from the user. What? Another blade. Esmond cried out in surprise. He continued to charge. Daemon took the same stance again, this time being lower to the floor due to the size of his new blade. As Esmond swooped in for a strike, Daemon parried it and lunged forward toward Esmond's neck. Enough. The duel is over, the king proclaimed as Daemon's sword rested against Esmond's throat. Esmond raised his hands in defeat. The king stood and asked Daemon what it was he desired of Duke Esmond. I have nothing I desire, Daemon said while looking in Elaine's direction. In that case, Elaine, come here. How about taking her hand? Esmond replied. I am. Daemon did not know how to respond. The king shouted, the winner, Daemon, has been granted the right to marry the duke's daughter, Elaine. The celebration will be held within 7 days' time. Elaine, standing before Daemon, blushed bright red. She raised the pleats of her skirt and introduced herself. Acting embarrassed, Elaine walked around the inner courtyard of the palace with Daemon. They had noticeably short chatter here and there. Most of the time, just silence filled the air. Arg, come on, why are they so quiet? Esmond leaned around the corner, spying on Elaine and Daemon. Young people these days, the king said, slightly behind Esmond. Elaine sat next to the fountain. Daemon, acting as if he were hypnotized, could not help staring in Elaine's direction. Elaine looked over towards Daemon. However, in the corner of her eye, she saw both her father and the king peeping on them. Sir Knight, behind you, she said, slightly pointing at a large pillar. Don't be so formal, call me Daemon. With that, he looked behind him and noticed them both hiding. He stood and grabbed Elaine's hand and ran. Elaine, with a large smile on her face, ran behind Daemon. Open the cell, a guardsman shouted, disturbing the thoughts going through Elaine's mind. I am one of the 5 high priests. I have been sent here to inform you the verdict has been passed. Elaine, daughter of Esmond, you are hereby sentenced to death, the high priest stated with an emotionless face. Elaine's eyes filled with tears, fearing she would never see her 2 daughters and Daemon again. Hold! You can't enter here, a guardsman shouted, the priest clicking his tongue. What's happening, guard? Shouted the priest, unhappy that he got interrupted. Priest, you have no business being here, Daemon spoke. I am here as a representative of the church. A mere knight has no place speaking to me, the priest muttered with a look in his eyes that showed just how much he looked down on everyone around him. Priest, you have no business here, just like Daemon has spoken. With those words, the king walked in. Behind him were Kel and Azah. Trailing on the floor were 2 men dressed in soldiers' uniforms. The priest, looking surprised, said, Your Majesty, you're alive? The high priest turned right around and walked away. Elaine, you are not being executed, for I know you did not do anything, the king announced. Elaine, seeing the king alive, smiled with tears running down her face. Your Majesty. Daemon, standing behind the king, said, I'm here too, you know, speaking with his arms hanging by his side as if disappointed she did not say his name first. The king just laughed and headed back to the throne room. Elaine, Kel, Daemon, and Azah, all of you follow me. The king, sitting on his throne, said, Elaine, stand forward, you have something to say. Elaine stood beside the king. Azah, come here. Yes, master, Azah responded as she stepped forward. Azah, take your necklace off. Azah, nervous and thinking she did something wrong, took the necklace from around her neck and placed it into her master's open hand. Elaine's index finger on her right hand glowed faintly. She moved her finger over the small circular necklace, inscribing the words, For you have been, for you never will, in the language of the gods. Azah, my dear, it gives me so much joy to say this to you. Azah looked directly at Elaine. You have graduated from being my apprentice. Master. Azah responded with tears in her eyes. Azah, no. No longer am I your master, responded Elaine. Call her by her name, Daemon said, poking Azah's side with his elbow. Elaine, responded Azah. Elaine just smiled and stood back in line with the rest. Elaine, Daemon, thank you for what you both have done. I will bestow upon you a town not far from the capital city. The king looked at both Elaine and Daemon with a pleased and proud look on his face. Azah, I heard you wish to become a royal mage. Is that correct? Yes, your majesty. It has always been my dream, Azah responded with delight on her face. Kel, you will be given a place amongst the royal knights. Normally, Daemon has the last word for who can join and who cannot. However, after the recent incident, I believe he will be in favor, the king said, looking directly at Daemon. Yes, I agree, Daemon said, closing his eyes while agreeing with the king. You are all dismissed. Daemon, return home to your family. You should not keep your daughters waiting too long, the king smiled at Daemon. Daemon and Elaine set off home, followed by Azah. Elaine wanted her to meet her daughters and spend some time with them while her transition into the royal mages was underway. Father, a faint voice could be heard echoing through the lush green field. Ella, Ola, father has returned. Daemon's posture and expression changed as his 2 daughters came to meet him just on the border of their land. From afar, the 2 shadowy figures stood behind the tree line, watching Daemon and his family. So it begins, the second shadowy figure uttered. So it does, the first shadowy figure replied.